Greetings. This presentation covers product maintenance in Eclipse, and we're going to take a look at most of the fields used for a common stock item. Please keep in mind I'm not going to cover all of the settings that you could possibly deal with in product maintenance. There are probably over 20 different screens and subscreens and possibly millions of different combinations of settings that you could do. So we're just going to cover the common settings that you're likely to see and what their uses are for just a standard stock item in the electrical distribution field. This is the main screen that you would see when running product maintenance in Eclipse. This screen is typically only being viewed by people involved directly in purchasing, possibly the quotes department when they're doing complex maintenance of a product, and anyone that might be a database administrator who's tasked with looking up and completing and modifying records to keep them up to date. In most cases, your inside salespeople or your general salespeople use a different utility to actually create a non-stock item from within a sales order. So this is not something that they would normally see. One of the fundamental rules when dealing with product maintenance is to keep in mind that you could change virtually every identifier, every description, every UPC code, everything that you could think of that would make a part in Eclipse. The one thing that will never change though is the record ID number. That's part of the database design, and it stays the same regardless of what you change within the record. So odds are you'll be probably creating reports and mass loads, and you should always keep the record number as one of the fields in your reports as an extra guarantee that you're continuously looking at the same thing. It's possible to have two different records and have nearly identical descriptions, and that gets fouled up. So as a general rule, when I'm doing maintenance, I tend to run reports. I look at the record numbers, and when I go into the record, I rather than typing in part of the description, getting a search list and running the risk of accidentally hitting a duplicate or hitting the wrong one by fat fingering it, I always put in, as you see in the second option here, put in a period. That tells the system that what follows the period is an exact record number, and put in the record number, and that way it guarantees that I'm looking at exactly what I'm expecting to look at according to my report. So the first field that we'll cover in product maintenance is the description field, and with descriptions pretty much the sky's the limit. You can write them just about any which way you like, or add them as long as you want. They can be multiple lines long, but the recommended format is to have an abbreviation based on the price line byline entry in your system, then use a catalog number, and then a short abbreviated description. Since the lines are only 35 characters long, you're trying to fit everything into that first 35 characters, at least the first line. As I said, the description can be multiple lines long, but on all your paperwork, your invoices, your pick tickets, and all that good stuff, only the first line is normally going to print according to settings, so anything that you write after that won't show up on the paperwork, although it might be useful to have in the product file itself. Here's an example listing of the price line, byline, abbreviations, and full descriptions that are in my system. Each system is going to probably be unique depending on what manufacturers and who set up the system originally and what schema they went by. But these are fairly common, and these are the abbreviations that you would normally see in pricing catalogs like IDEA or IDW or trade service in some cases. And this list should probably be made available to anyone that is usually doing any type of product maintenance in the long term. Here's a continuation of the price line byline list, and the fact that you don't know yet what price lines or bylines are, don't worry about that, we'll get to that later. This list, as I said, is usually maintained by the purchasing agent who does a lot of record maintenance, and whoever it is that might be designated in the company to do the database maintenance. For final note on writing descriptions, it's usually bad form to use a single quote or double quote in the system. It has something to do with the way the system generates reports and when you do exports out of it. And also the use of a dash, like as you see here in the catalog number. This is of course for readability, but it also serves as a secondary function. In the Eclipse search system, when you use a dash, it's seen as a bridge character. So when you go in to type in parts of the description to do a search for the product, because we've used a bridge character, what the system sees that number as being is 56012, not 5601 or 5601-2. So just keep that in mind. As soon as you put a dash in, it sees that whole section that's bridged by dashes as being one string of characters minus the dashes as things to search on. Additional keywords are another way of providing additional searching info and another way of grouping products together. Typically they're used by the inside sales or counter sales people kind of as a shortcut string of characters to type in rather than the full description or UPC code, which they probably wouldn't know. They usually take the form of the abbreviation for the price line and buy line and the catalog number with all the spaces, slashes, and dashes removed, so a concatenation of that. You can have several keywords that are put in here as long as they've got a space between them. Each one is seen as a separate search string. So as you see in the second window, we've got 3 different search strings, and typing in any of those would bring me that record. This is also used in a quickie way of cross-referencing parts or putting substitutes or an obsoleted item that people might still be using the search into a way of linking it to the replacement. This is not really what it's supposed to be used for, but it's quick and down and dirty, and everyone seems to get used to doing it that way. Price lines and buy lines are separate topics that will be covered in other presentations, but generally speaking, the basics of it are price line represents the manufacturer of the product and is usually used for reporting information and for constructing pricing matrix. The buy line is used to control how the purchase orders are created and filling in the default purchasing information and some of the parameters controlling it. In most cases, the price line and the buy line will be named identically, and so the entry will be the same for both. There are some cases where that's not the case, where it might be manufactured from one person but you're buying it from something else, a rep agency, a third party, or something like that. And in that case, for your reporting and pricing, you want it to represent the manufacturer, but for the purchasing parameters, you'll want that to go somewhere else. Status is the type of product it is, or the way the product is used or stocked. A stock item is something that you intend to keep on the shelf and regularly reordered. A non-stock item is an irregularly ordered item that may be on the shelf currently, but you don't intend to replenish it on a regular basis. The remaining status options that you see will be covered in other presentations, but generally speaking, what they're used for is for products that are not really products. The functions in the system to add miscellaneous charges like cutting charges for wire, to tag a product to be reviewed and corrected or deleted, something that's not really a product but a comment that you want in the body of an order, whether or not something should be tagged for purging. Temporary is really not used, it's irrelevant. And lot items, that's another subject entirely. About a lot item is something that's purchased as a lot that may have actually several sub-items in it, but those are not specified. These fields are normally not used and they're left blank. Budget group used for sales reporting, procure group, refined purchasing process and schedule. A cut product to specify whether a product can be sold in sublengths other than the length it comes in. A cut product would be used, say bulk wire that you're unreeling, and there's a whole process for dealing with cut product maintenance, which we won't get into in this presentation. But as a general rule, these are blank. The unit of measure defaults are normally not altered from what you see here. Yours might be slightly different in your system, but typically you'd have a unit of measure designator, typically each, and a quantity of 1. And this is fairly common for most parts. The reason why this exists is because quite often you have products that are purchased at one quantity, priced at one quantity, sold at a different quantity when they're entered into the sales order. This usually is what's controlling, translating the number typed into, is it per each, per hundred, per thousand, etc., etc. Examples of these types of products that are purchased in one size, sold in another, would be wire or conduit. These parameters also work in conjunction with the buy quantity and the sell quantity, which can be specified, say in the case of spools of wire. If you buy 500 foot spools of wire, well, okay, it's priced per 1,000 foot. You're buying it in 500 foot spools. You're buying them in boxes of 4 500 foot spools, so you'd have to set a buy quantity of 2,000 to cover all 4 spools in the box, and you're selling it per 500. So this unit of measure defaults in conjunction with these others make sure that you're pricing it and selling it at the right measurements. Far be it from me to say that Eclipse doesn't give you enough optional parameters to change the behavior of their software. Usually it's death by too many options. Anyway, reading this unit of measure defaults is a little tricky, but the codex here is to how to read it is it's showing you what the default unit of measure applied should be, unless overridden, for sold, as in sales orders, purchased as in purchase orders, transfers in transfer orders, adjustments as in product maintenance adjustments, and inventory for inventory count. As you can see in this example here, you can have multiple units of measures. The check marks, of course, are going to show which one is going to be the default unit of measure unless otherwise stated for each of these types of activities. If you decide to create multiple units of measure to sell thing on, and this would be used, say, in the case of when you do a sales order. If you see the example here, if I decide to sell something, I would type in 1, I would hit enter, then I'd start typing in the description. The system, according to the check mark, would naturally assume that the 1 I typed in meant 1 each, and adjust everything, pricing and such accordingly. I could type in 1C, and then automatically the system would know, okay, don't take the default of each, this guy means 100, and switch it accordingly there. And that's its usual behavior if you had multiple options. We have tried this in the past. This usually causes more aggravation than what it's worth. People complain at me constantly about, well, spools of wire. Well, there's 500 feet in a spool. I don't want to sell 500 eaches, meaning 500 feet of a spool. I want to sell 1 spool. Well, then you can argue back and forth, well, look at the spools. We have 500 foot spool, 1500 foot spool, 2500 foot spool. What unit of measure could I possibly put in that you're going to understand when you specify spool? You meant the 500 foot one, not the 1500. You can see how this degenerates in a mess. And that's why normally everything stays at each. If you decide not to take the advice on that and add additional units of measure, and God help you, then this is how it's done. The lowest has to be first. The unit of measure naming that you use should be short and sweet and to the point. I think it only allows for 8 characters anyway. They should be in lowercase letters. If you type it in uppercase, it'll understand lowercase, but not always. If you type something in uppercase, will it understand it's supposed to be lowercase. So you specify the unit of measure in lowercase, and the translation will do what it's supposed to do, according to the big book of Eclipse anyway. And then this would be an example of multiple units of measure. As I said, they only would come into play is if someone typed in 1C or 1M, and then the system would translate, oh, that's not each, that's per 1,000, per 100, etc., and adjust accordingly. I would not suggest altering this. Next is product select code. This is normally left blank. Its use is it's another mechanism for grouping products together, mainly for reporting purposes. It's usually used in conjunction with sort, but leave it blank. GeoAccount product type is usually not tampered with. Its purpose is, according to the manual, used to group products for sales analysis and reporting. And this, if you were to use it, all would be used in close work with the accounting department. Another place where it is used more commonly is when miscellaneous charge items are created. You have to tag it to a particular account. Also, this you have to discuss with the accounting department before miscellaneous charge items are set up properly. Commodity code. This is often blank unless a lot of your product information was coming from a catalog pricing service like Trade Service, IDEA, IDW, or AD Unilog, or something similar. In the case, it's either 4-digit or 8-digit code. If it's 4-digit, it's the old Trade Service legacy code. If it's 8-digit, it's the newer international standard code that IDEA, IDW tends to use now. And this is a way for the catalog services to group together similar parts that are manufactured by different companies, or to group similar parts together. This was originally intended to be used for pricing matrix. I've never found it to be useful to do it in such a way, so this commodity code field has never been terribly useful. Index type is used as a way of cleaning up the search list when you're searching for parts in sales order entry, purchase order entry, etc. This is a way of moving products that are seldomly used without deleting them from the system, just in case they are used. In this example here, you'll see you're in a sales order entry and you're selecting an Appleton product, and you see a very, very long search list. Notice there's 3 tabs. In our system, at least, there's 3 tabs because we have product data warehouse. So the primary index is where you're going to for the active parts. If you didn't see the thing there, you could click on the catalog tab, and then you'd see the next list of, think of them as archived products. So it's just a cleanup mechanism, and this comes in very handy for regular record maintenance. Sort code is used to override the product sort order in some reports. That way you can put them in the order that you want them to be. It is often used in conjunction with the product select code for grouping and ordering for reports. UPC codes, or barcodes, are unique identifying codes for products that are assigned by a national standards body, or in this case also an international standards body. In the early days of Eclipse, UPC codes were 11 digits long, with the first 6 digits identifying the manufacturer of the product and the last 5 digits identifying the actual product. In later years, it morphed into a 12-digit code, with the 12th digit being a checksum. In Eclipse, generally as a holdover from legacy, the primary UPC code is expected to be 11 digits. If you've got a newer system, you might be using all 12 digits, but in our system we use the legacy 11 digit as the primary UPC. In the secondary UPC field, we use the full 12 digits. If you have the 12 digit and you don't have the 11 digit code, well, just lop off the checksum from the end, and that gives you the 11 digit code. UPC-A, UPC-E, EAN, and GTIN, these are all supersets or subsets of the UPC code. The GTIN, I believe, is the international standard, so I think it's 14 digits long. And we have special places to put those. Ordinarily, the primary UPC is the one that is most needed. Keep in mind that only products that have been registered, likely all those products that are in your catalog services like Trade Service or IDEA, IDW, only those will have UPCs. Unfortunately, companies, especially lighting manufacturers, they come out with new products so fast they don't bother to register them. So it's quite likely a good 40% of the products that you have in your warehouse, in the case of our company, won't have UPC codes and never will. In that case, because of the mechanisms that Eclipse has in it for maintaining prices in mass, it uses the UPC code to do those mass price changes. So for products that you have in your maintenance file that don't have UPCs on their own, you should assign internal ones, which we'll discuss at some other point. Here in user-defined maintenance, we'll see the field for entering in the product catalog number and additional fields for user-defined UPCs. And in our system, we use field 1 to store the GTIN number if we've got it available. And you can have a whole series of internal numbers that you could add for searching fields for reporting. The alternate descriptions entry can be used to create a more generic description for the product. Say in some cases you're wanting to obscure the information details a little bit more on your invoices and statements to make it a little bit harder for the customers to shop your pricing. It is also potentially used for the e-commerce sites if you're using the e-commerce connector to give a more generic description for searching on. The additional inventory parameters window is a little bit trickier to get at. You have to click on inventory and go through the primary inventory maintenance window. That window is just information only. In order to change the parameters that you see there, you usually have to go other places in the system, or a lot of these might be coming from the control maintenance defaults. Anyway, when you get to the additional inventory parameters, what I've mainly used this for, there's obviously additional information there, but we use it mainly for setting the buy package quantity. In this case, in this example, say for instance we have a product that we sell one at a time, but when we go to buy it from the vendor, it comes in a box of 12 and the vendor won't allow us to purchase in odd quantities, so we have to buy entire boxes. So by setting this buy quantity and make sure that say we don't try and order 13 from the vendor, that we either order a box of 12 or 2 boxes of 24, so multiples of whatever entries put in the buy package. Here in product price maintenance, we see that there's quite a few options that we can play with here, but honestly the only thing that I see that we regularly use here is the sell package quantity field. Here in the example, I've set it to 12, meaning that regardless of how I buy it, but in this case, of course, we know that I set to buy it as 12, that I don't want to sell a broken box of, I want to sell entire boxes, so I've set it that can only be sold in boxes of entire 12. Typically what you see is when this setting is used for wire and conduit pipe. Depending on the type of wire, say for example we have 500-foot spool wires, we don't cut off of 500-foot spools, so we sell the entire spool. Since our wire we have set up in the parameters that it's sold per foot per each. In the sell package quantity I'd set is 500, so that I'm only selling entire 500-foot spools to the customer. Here in product group maintenance, we assign a common identifier to group products together in the case of our system for pricing. A pricing matrix, which is another presentation we're going to do because it's a very complex subject, you can create pricing matrices to key on anything, but in our system we create our pricing matrices based on the product cell group. There are also matrices that can be created for buy groups, but we don't use any of that, and I don't know anyone that does. So anyway, we use this cell group to create our pricing matrix, and as a quick overview of a basic matrix structure, what we have is we have 4 pricing classes in our system. Our customers are assigned one of those 4 classes. Then the product is assigned one of these cell group identifier numbers. A cell group can be named anything. In this case, I just use these numbers as a mnemonic to remind me when I'm constructing the matrix of what GP margins I'm creating in the matrix for each class of customer. And so When you tie the class to the group for the product, you put in the formula of what you want the markup to be, and you get your GP percentages that you want. So the cell group number is extremely important to put in there, or else the system will not know how to show the recommended price in the sales order. The price sheet maintenance is where we go ahead and put in the price bases numbers for the product. In most cases, these numbers are coming from your catalog service like ID, IDW, trade service, AD Unilog, or they may be coming directly from the vendor. In the case of these fields that you see here, market, list, purchase cost, calc cost, market and list are not used in our sales orders for our system. I mean, as said before, you can create a pricing matrices keying on just about anything, but in our case we're only using purchase cost and calc cost for the functions in our system. The market and list fields are pretty much optional, but they are used in the e-commerce connector for the suggested list price field to show up on the products on the website. Anyway, so as you see here in this example, what we're showing is the price per quantity. You have to have this calculated in that fits in with the other parameters in the system to make sure that you're using the right basis number for the right quantity that you're selling, and all the calculations come out right. This works in conjunction with the pricing matrix, as mentioned, and most of our pricing is based on calc cost. So the calc cost number, whatever number is putting in there, which in most cases is the same as our purchasing cost. Calc cost may only be different in most cases because of market forces, or more than likely because there's shipping costs that we're trying to recapture, and so we incorporate the freight charges into the calc cost so that we're not losing money on freight. And in our matrices and our systems, we do a markup from the calc cost, which we mentioned some of in the previous slide. One of the great strengths of Eclipse is that it's billed as being a real-time timeline system. So every transaction that is done not only incorporates the what was done, what price, etc., but when it was done. And this comes into play also when we're doing pricing updates. We don't just simply wipe out the purchase cost, calc cost fields and replace them with something else. We actually create a new effective date, and so the system will keep track of what the price was at previous times. This also means that we can go ahead and set a price to go into effect in a future date at some point other than today. The reason for doing this is in most cases it has to deal with credit and rebills and returns. If a price increases and a customer brings something back that they bought 2 months ago, you want to credit him at what the price was 2 months ago, not what the price is now today, or else you're obviously paying him more than what he paid for it, which is not a good idea. Anyway, so when you go ahead and do a price change, you create a new effective date. And the funny quirk with this system in solar is that you have to, when you get into the price line dates, you have to click on the top effective date field and click on the right mouse button and select Insert Row. The first couple of times someone goes to do this, they go a little wiggy trying to find a menu drop down for Insert Row and can't find it. And that's, you can thank the Epicor Eclipse programmers for that nonsense. So just keep that in mind when you go to select create a new effective date, that you select the last effective date off of the list, just to highlight it, and then right click and select Insert Row. Once you've created a new effective date, then you go into the price sheet maintenance and enter in your numbers. You can change unit of measure per quantities if necessary, if there's been some goof or update in the pricing catalog. Be very careful when you do this, because you have to keep the buy quantity, sell quantity, and all the other unit of measure issues straight, or else your pricing formulas will come out wrong. Now, any number that you don't change, the system will automatically default to whatever that last number was the last time it was changed. So, and you'll see them grayed out. So in our example here, market and list, we don't have a new number for those, so we're just carrying over the old ones. But purchase cost and calc cost are new numbers, so we're putting those in. Now, the purchase cost number is used in purchase order entry, and when a PO is created for an item, this number is going to be the suggested cost that's put in automatically in the purchase order entry. The purchase agent can override that number. This is just going to be a suggested number, but it's always good form to keep the real purchase cost updated as best as possible. And as we said before, in our system, we're using calc cost as the basis number for all of our cell pricing matrices. So this is the number that we're putting in that is going to be having the formula applied to it for the suggested selling price in the sales orders. This also is used for calculating the commissions for the sales force. In product relationships, this is where you would normally go to define products that are usually related to, normally sold with another product. Do you want fries with that order? Or in this case, in our example, we're talking about, say, if they've bought a conduit body, and do they want the gasket and the cover that goes with it? Things that you might want to suggest as an upsell mechanism. This would be used more in the plumbing industry than the electrical, but you have that feature in there if you wanted to program it and try and maintain it. This is also where you're supposed to put in the substitute item information. We mentioned in a previous slide that usually the keyword field is used as a quickie way of doing substitutes and cross-references. That's a cheap and dirty way to do it. What you're really supposed to do is create the substitute items officially in this, and so when you're out of a particular item, the system can automatically recommend a substitute in the sales order. No one ever seems to do that, but boy, wouldn't it be nice if they did. User controls. What this is ordinarily used for is to manually set the stock and reorder points for creating new items. Eclipse is very good at automatically calculating demand and creating suggested purchase orders, but it needs a few months and several purchasing cycles before it has enough history before it can start recommending with any accuracy. So typically, if you're creating a new stock item, you'd go ahead and put in a manual demand calculation and set it to expire at a certain time till the system can catch up and start doing the automatic suggested POs with some accuracy. There are also cases when you may have a customer job where you've committed to keeping a supply of parts in stock for them to use on demand, but the demand can be very erratic, and that you'd want to set a manual because the system wouldn't be able from the normal history to be able to make sense of what it's supposed to keep in stock, and would try and keep the stock lower than what you actually had committed to. The PDW menu gives you access to the product data warehouse functions. Product data warehouse is a companion product. It doesn't come with a standard default Eclipse setup. We are a product data warehouse user, so we do have one. For those people who don't know what a PDW is, this is an additional database table, you could think of it, or in Eclipse parlance it's a file, and you'd subscribe to a catalog service like IDW. They create a weekly export file which is automatically imported into your system, and it goes in a temporary holding area called the product data warehouse. And in this table you're able to get all the catalog information that the pricing service, catalog service, is supposedly maintaining for you, and you can use this to en masse update parts of your product file records. One of the processes to making the PDW work after it's imported all the information from the catalog services, PDW can also be used to import vendor information too. I warn you ahead of time, if you haven't bought PDW, it is a bear to set up, but it is powerful, and considering the cost, it's probably worth the cost and effort, especially if you have lots of records. Anyway, in order for PDW to do its magic, at some point you've got to do a sync. So you take the records that you've created in your product file, you go into the product data warehouse maintenance function, and you sync the record that's the master record in PDW to the product file record. And then when you go to do a mass change to, say, descriptions or to calc cost pricing and such, it knows which records to update with which information. Once you've created this sync, if you have to do maintenance, if you have to purge a product record for some reason and such, you've got to unsync it or else you'll foul things up. And occasionally during a sync operation you'll sync to the wrong file and you'll have to unsync it to fix it, or else you'll obviously push the wrong information into the wrong record. As mentioned in other presentations, almost everything that you do in Eclipse is logged. It keeps track of the who did it, when it was done, and what was changed. And this is certainly the case also in product file maintenance. So anytime something is changed to a record, that information is logged. It can come in very handy when there's arguments over a price change. Who changed that price? How come this is fouled up? And you can look in the log and remove all doubt. Keep in mind when you're reading the log file that what you'll see is, yes, the user who made the change, whoever was logged in anyway, making that change, the date and time it was changed. It does not show you in description what it was changed to. It will show you what it was changed from. So keep that in mind when you're looking at these numbers. It's not going to show you what it is currently now. It's going to show you what it was before it was changed. As mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, this is not an all-encompassing, comprehensive overview of product maintenance. The product maintenance can be about as complicated as you could possibly want it. You could easily spend several days going through all the options, sub-options, and sub-sub-options. What I've covered here is just the common types of things that I see when creating stock items, for an example, for the electrical distribution industry. Your mileage may vary, of course. If you want more details on these other functions, of course, you've always got the Eclipse online manual. When you're logged into Eclipse, you hit F11, you get the manual. Good luck trying to decipher what it's telling you. And this completes our presentation on product maintenance for general stock items for electrical distribution. I hope this has been informative and useful, and as always, I am not Scott Zahn.